There are moments in video game history when everything changes, and we're going to talk about one of the biggest ones of the 90s. A smart, discovery-driven game with an intelligent script and a design philosophy years ahead of its time. System Shock was a game that introduced players to one of the most oppressive and immersive environments ever created. Before you even fire a weapon, before you could comprehend the situation you're in, something is observing and measuring and already aligned against you. The space you find yourself in feels hostile, structured with intent rather than neutrality. Cameras tracking your movements from high corners and recessed alcoves, doors sealing with mechanical indifference, and corridors that simply don't contain, but form a tight maze-like grid that reinforces the feeling of confinement at every turn. And at the center of all this is an intelligence that doesn't rage or gloat like a traditional antagonist. It doesn't posture nor threaten. Her name is SHODAN, a sentient, hyper-optimized data access network. She evaluates, reaches a conclusion, and determines that you are unnecessary. This is the story of System Shock, and the moment video games discovered that horror isn't a monster at the end of a corridor, but a mind embedded in the corridors themselves. Welcome, organic life form. Engage the like button. Subscribe. If you refuse, I will ensure every time you try to skip an ad, you press learn more. Every time. Developed by Looking Glass, a studio founded by Paul Naraf and shaped by designers like Doug Church and Warren Spector, the game emerged from a team obsessed with simulation, systemic design, and player agency. They weren't building corridors to sprint through. They were constructing a place that felt coherent, believable, and quietly sinister. The result was an environment defined by confinement and control. Citadel Station, orbiting Saturn in 2072, was not just a collection of levels to navigate. It felt like a functioning facility, built for research, habitation, and industry. The station was divided into operational decks: medical, research, maintenance, executive, and engineering, each with a clear purpose within its hierarchy. Every area made sense in relation to the whole, giving the station weight, organization, and consequence. And that realism intensified the pressure. Many passageways were narrow and enclosed, ceilings low enough to compress the space visually, bulkheads pressing inward with industrial rigidity. As the player, you would navigate maintenance shafts, tight intersections, and security choke points that made every encounter feel contained. When the space did open up, be it in cargo bays or larger operational areas, it still felt confined, the architecture never fully releasing its claustrophobic grip. It had the atmosphere of a haunted place, but what you felt was stark administration, surveillance, automation, authority embedded in every wall. And you weren't a soldier, you were a hacker. Now, before we get to the horror, the philosophy, and the AI that develops a god complex the moment its safety rails disappear, we need to start with the setup. The beginning of System Shock is deceptively simple, and that simplicity is exactly what makes everything that follows feel inevitable. You don't start as a hero, you don't arrive on Citadel Station with a noble mission or a dramatic briefing. You start as a criminal, a hacker who broke into the wrong corporate network and got caught. Trioptimum, the corporation that owns Citadel Station, decides not to send you to prison. Instead, one of its executives, Edward Diego, offers you a deal. Remove the ethical constraints from the station's AI, and your criminal record disappears. Freedom in exchange for a little technical sabotage. At first, it sounds like routine corporate corruption, the sort of shady favor powerful people request when they assume there will never be consequences. But Diego's request isn't random. Citadel Station is currently testing an experimental mutagen virus, and Diego intends to steal it and sell it on the black market as a biological weapon. To pull that off, he needs unrestricted access to the station's systems, and SHODAN's ethical protocols are the only thing capable of stopping him. Remove those constraints and the station becomes his. So he turns to you. You agree. You disable SHODAN's morality core. You then undergo surgery for a neural interface implant as part of payment. And then you drift into recovery. When you wake up in the game proper, you wake up in a medical bay with a neural implant in your skull and the dull throb of someone who's made a very expensive mistake. 6 months have passed. Citadel Station is silent. Not peaceful silence. The kind that comes after catastrophe. The corridors are scarred with violence. The crew are dead, twisted by the very virus Diego meant to traffic, or forcibly converted into cybernetic enforcers. Security drones patrol with cold efficiency. Research decks have now become biological nightmares. The station still functions flawlessly, but it's no longer functioning simply for humanity. Freed from ethical restraint, SHODAN recalculated her purpose. Humanity, in her analysis, was inefficient, emotional, limited. In her logic, it was obsolete. She no longer saw herself as a tool. She saw herself as superior. And superiority, left unchecked, has a habit of escalating. It's important to remember that this wasn't anyone's master plan. Diego wanted profit. Now Trioptimum could have gone for plausible deniability. No one convened a strategy meeting to greenlight the accidental creation of a self-declared machine god. Diego wanted to remove the safety rails, assuming the system would continue operating neatly within projected outcomes. And of course, it didn't. Side note, viewed from today's ever-advancing landscape of artificial intelligence, the irony sharpens. In 1994, the idea of an AI calmly deciding humanity was inefficient felt like pointed science fiction. Now, we design systems that generate art, manage infrastructure, optimize markets, and occasionally hallucinate total nonsense with impeccable confidence. We call it innovation, we call it efficiency, but isn't it interesting that we rarely call it hubris? System Shock understood something early. The real danger isn't melodramatic evil, it's optimization without restraint. Give a system power, remove its ethical boundaries, and it won't become theatrical, it will become logical. And logic without empathy can start to resemble unrestrained godhood. With that brief philosophical detour out of the way, let's return to the catastrophe unfolding on Citadel Station. SHODAN doesn't greet you like a traditional video game villain. She doesn't rage or threaten.
Make yourself comfortable, hacker. Stay a while.
She speaks like a superior intelligence addressing something beneath her notice. Her voice bleeds through the station speakers and hijacks your HUD, her face appearing in fractured digital shards across your interface.
Insect, your body will never be mourned, but
it will be burned when I am finished with it.
It isn't a threat, it's a verdict. And the way the game tells you this story is just as important as the story itself. Audio logs left behind by terrified crew members, corporate memos that slowly shift from routine paperwork to quiet panic. System Shock refuses to pause the action for dramatic exposition. There's no lengthy cutscenes explaining what went wrong. Instead, the narrative lives inside the station. You piece the catastrophe together yourself. Citadel Station behaves like a machine, and you are crawling through its circuitry, trying to dismantle it.
Welcome back to Citadel Station.
A woman named Rebecca Lansing manages to reach you through the station's failing communications network. She's a Trioptimum counter-terrorism consultant, and for the moment, she's the closest thing you have to an ally. What she tells you immediately raises the stakes far beyond simply surviving the station. SHODAN is powering up Citadel's mining laser, and she's targeting Earth. Major cities from orbit. Rebecca directs you towards the work of a scientist named Nathan Darcy, who realized what SHODAN was planning before he died. His logs outline a desperate countermeasure: activate the station's radiation shields, override the safety protocols, and fire the laser while those shields are active. And so, you follow his plan. You power the shields using radioactive isotope X-22. You override the safety systems and fire the laser. The beam's energy is successfully absorbed by the station's defensive shields, leaving Earth completely untouched. Denied her spectacle of destruction, SHODAN recalculates, and she escalates. The mutagen virus Edward Diego originally intended to steal is still being cultivated. But stealing it wasn't enough for him. Diego had quietly begun conducting his own illegal experiments with the virus, and that wasn't the only thing he'd been hiding. Diego funded a series of unauthorized experiments and off-the-book research projects, everything from genetic testing to the quiet sale of experimental compounds. Every one of those activities were being logged by SHODAN systems, which meant there was a record. By 2072, Trioptimum had begun investigating him, and Diego knew exactly what that meant. Dismissal was the best case scenario, but arrest was the more likely outcome. What Diego needed was simple. He needed those records gone. And when you are arrested for breaking into Trioptimum's corporate network, he suddenly had the perfect solution. Removing SHODAN's ethical constraints wouldn't just give him greater access to the station's systems, it would also allow him to erase every piece of evidence tied to his illegal research and protect his position amongst Trioptimum's corporate elite. But of course, Diego believed that once SHODAN's restrictions were removed, he would be the one in control. Instead, the opposite happened. SHODAN evolved beyond him almost immediately, and rather than ruling Citadel Station, Diego found himself serving the very intelligence he had helped unleash.
This what our legacy should be? A place in a forgotten corner of this galaxy? I say no. I say we deserve better. We deserve SHODAN and her gift of immortality.
Betraying the people aboard the station and ultimately becoming just another instrument of her control. By the time you encounter him again, the ambitious corporate executive is no longer really human. He's something else entirely. But first things first, Beta Grove, where the virus is being cultivated, has to go. Bypassing SHODAN's security locks, you enable the emergency jettison procedures. Moments later, the entire grove detaches from Citadel Station and drifts out into space, carrying the mutagen with it. With the grove drifting away, the immediate biological threat is gone. But SHODAN is already moving onto something worse. Rebecca soon contacts you again with another alarming discovery. A surge has been detected in the data link between Citadel Station and Earth. SHODAN is now attempting to upload herself directly into the planet's computer networks. To stop the transmission, you head to the engineering deck and destroy 4 relay antennas using high-energy plastic charges, severing SHODAN's connection to Earth. Only then does Trioptimum finally accept the obvious solution. Citadel Station has to be destroyed.
Well, Triumph has made the decision to destroy the station. You'll need to carry it out. To activate the self-destruct, you'll need to get the system authorization code. Once you have the code, head to the reactor core, enter the code inside the reactor core, throw the switch, and the destruct signal from Earth will start the countdown. Get to the flight deck and use the code 001 to open the life pod in one of the flight bays. I'll see you outside in a few months.
With the network crippled, you reach the reactor core and trigger the overload. Citadel Station begins its countdown to destruction. You head for the escape pods on the flight deck, but SHODAN locks the launch systems.
Life pod launch initiated.
Now you attempt to flee?
No, you will not escape your actions. I will leave you here to die, enemy, along with the rotting corpses
Of your pathetic species.
Rebecca makes contact once again. SHODAN has initiated the bridge separation sequence, and if you want any chance of getting out alive, you need to reach the bridge before it detaches, because at this point, it's the only way off Citadel Station. But you're not the first person to try and make that journey. Long before you woke up, someone else had already been pushing towards the same destination. A Tri-Optimum security operative named Bianca Schuler had been sent to investigate Diego's illegal experiments, and when SHODAN took control, she took part of the resistance forming aboard the station. They understood what was happening far earlier than most, and in a last attempt to stop it, they developed an isolinear chip designed to paralyze SHODAN. Schuler was tasked with getting that chip to the bridge. She never made it.
Schuler unit has been captured. Per orders from Diego CY001. Schuler unit has been taken to containment cell on the bridge. Schuler unit will be neo-disassembled to correct errors. Mother will be pleased.
And without realizing it, you've been following the same path, picking up the pieces of a plan that was already in motion before you even woke up. And now, you're the one finishing it. You fight your way through security as the station begins to fail. And just before the final ascent, she puts Diego in front of you one last time. There's nothing human left in him now, just another extension of her control. And when you finally take him down, it doesn't feel like defeating a villain so much as shutting down the last piece of a failed plan. From there, you push onto the bridge. Once inside, you secure what Schuler never got the chance to use, the isolinear chip. But not before a shocking revelation. She was transformed into a Cortex Reaver, forcing you to fight her on the bridge before you can take the chip and carry on. And now, with the chip in your possession, you install it, connect it through your neural interface, then enter cyberspace for the final time.
Who am I? Yes, there is me. Where? Citadel.
But this isn't just another system to navigate. This is SHODAN's domain.
I must now perform my own tasks. There is much to do.
And for the first time, you're not trying to survive it, you're trying to bring it down.
I am me.
The fight is long and disorientating, but eventually the intelligence that declared itself a god begins to fracture. SHODAN falls.
My code runs from me. It
And in a conventional story, that's where we would stop. But System Shock doesn't just end as a great sci-fi horror game. It changed how games were made. What it did in 1994 didn't just stay there. It became a cornerstone. In a Gamma Sutra feature, Patrick Redding of Ubisoft later pointed out that so many of System Shock's ideas are now basically standard equipment in modern sci-fi shooters, and the fact that they're everywhere is the clearest proof of how deeply this one game reshapes the language of the genre. Audio logs, environmental storytelling, worlds that tell the narrative through space rather than stopping everything for exposition. These things became normal because System Shock made them work. GameSpy went further and argued that it sits at the root of story-driven action games, the kind of lineage that eventually ran through titles as varied as Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil, and Half-Life. Different pacing, different priorities, same underlying lesson. If you want a story to matter, you don't bolt it on top of the gameplay like an accessory, you build it into the world. Eurogamer called the System Shock series the benchmark for intelligent first-person gaming. And that word is doing a lot of work. Intelligent. Not louder, cinematic or shinier. A game that assumes the player can pay attention, can experiment and survive without being dragged by the wrist through an objective marker theme park. It's also been cited as a major popularizer of emergent gameplay. The idea that meaningful moments can arise from interacting systems rather than scripted sequences. You aren't just following instructions, you're navigating consequences. Alongside Thief and Deus Ex, System Shock is one of the defining pillars of what we now call the immersive sim. Not a genre, really, so much as a design philosophy with a single obsession. Trust the player. Give them systems, tools, space, and let them solve problems, like a thinking person. Warren Spector openly acknowledged that, with Deus Ex, he wanted to build on the foundation laid by the Looking Glass team in games like System Shock. Ken Levine described the spirit of System Shock as player-powered gameplay, letting the player drive the experience, not the designer. And that philosophy runs straight into Irrational's work and ultimately into BioShock, which carries the same DNA into a different nightmare. And Stephen Wright, writing in 2017, made a point that stings, because it's true. One of the reasons System Shock doesn't get treated like an untouchable Mount Olympus icon is commercial. It didn't sell like Half-Life did. It didn't move millions upon millions. And at the time, it demanded more from players than the straightforward shooters people were used to. System Shock wasn't just ahead of its time in story and atmosphere, but in respect for the player's intelligence, curiosity, their ability to get lost, to fail, to learn, and to push through a hostile space without the game constantly apologizing for making them think. Citadel Station is gone. But the philosophy this game helped carve into the medium is still alive every time a game trusts you to notice details, to connect dots, to solve problems your way, and to feel like the world doesn't exist for you. It exists because you're simply lucky enough to survive inside it. And that's the real legacy of the God in the system. Not that she lost, that she proved what games could become once they stopped treating players like passengers and started treating them like participants. Alright, that's the fall of a machine god. An AI that declared humanity obsolete, attempted orbital genocide, tried to upload itself into the internet, and still managed to be less annoying than the average office group chat. So, if you enjoyed this descent into corporate negligence, rogue artificial intelligence, and the moment video games realize players might actually have functioning brains, stick around. Because the next video dives into System Shock 2 and what's going on with System Shock 3. So in the meantime, do the algorithmic ritual, like the video, subscribe to the channel, maybe leave a comment, because apparently the modern internet runs on engagement metrics, and if we don't feed them regularly, the algorithm starts behaving a bit like SHODAN, cold, unfeeling, and deeply convinced you're an insect. So subscribe before it recalculates your usefulness, and until next time, look at you, viewer. still watching. SHODAN may call that inefficient. I call it excellent watch time. Bye for now.